For example, if we overheat chicks in the hatchery, they will never compensate. That I can tell you, and there's been lots of research behind it, and I've seen it. If we overheat chicks in the hatchery, they will not perform in the field.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Poultry Podcast. My name is Jason Emmert, and today we're chatting with Dr. Ann Hubbard, who is an independent poultry veterinarian consultant with her own consulting business, Professional Poultry. Dr. Hubbard received an undergraduate degree in poultry science from Mississippi State University and a master's degree working with the USDA South Central Poultry Research Lab, ARS, before entering vet school at Mississippi State. And she concurrently completed another master's degree in avian medicine. Dr. Hubbard worked for the MSU College of Veterinary Medicine, predominantly in the field and in diagnostics, for 18 years before working for Merck Animal Health in their poultry unit for 8 years, then started her own consulting business 2 years ago. Dr. Hubbard, welcome to the Poultry Podcast.
Thank you.
It's great to have you with us. And to get started, if you don't mind, maybe share just a little bit about your academic journey and how you ended up where you are today.
Okay. Well, I am a resident originally, I'm a native of Louisiana and grew up in LSU Tiger. Always dreamed of going to vet school at LSU. And when it came time to decide where I wanted to go, I had two of my best friends that were going to Mississippi State. Their parents were alumni of Mississippi State. So I tagged along with them to visit and just kind of fell in love with Starkville, like most everybody that goes to Starkville does, and ended up going there for undergrad. Actually went up there thinking I'm going to vet school. That's my plan. And so I just did pre-vet. And then one day my advisor pulled me in and he said, you can't get a degree and just pre-vet. We need to have a backup plan. And so I went around and just met with the dairy science. At that time, we had a dairy science, animal science, and poultry science individual departments. And I went and met with all the department heads, and poultry science was the one that, the 100% job placement, things like that, kind of attractive. And so I said, I don't know anything about birds, so that would be good for me when I go to vet school. So decided to do that. And meanwhile, I was actually working as a receptionist at the South Central Poultry Research Lab. So the research leader there was encouraging me to go on for a master's degree. And I was like, no, I just want to go to vet school, And he was quite persuasive. So I ended up doing a master's there under him because he was adjunct faculty to poultry science. So I was able to, we were able to make that work. And then I went on to vet school and just decided to really, even in my third year, thought I was going to be a small animal surgeon, quite honestly. And I ran into one of my older poultry professors from undergrad who was at the vet school. And he said, this is Dr. Robert Kears. I think I've heard some of your past guests mention him. He was definitely one of my main mentors. He ran into me in the hallway one day and he said, you're going to do poultry, right? And I said, no, sir, I don't plan on it. And he was like, oh, you have to. And I said, well, I really wasn't planning on it. So he made me promise that I'll give him 2 of my externships. And so I did. And the way it fell, they were actually my first 2 externships I did. And he had set me up with Dr. Donna Hill, who I think most everybody in the industry knows, and Dr. Dick Boyd, who was also one of my great mentors. And after doing 2 internships with them, I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. So that's why I took the path of poultry science.
When it comes to purity, performance, and immunity, High-D has been helping layers, broilers, and turkeys stand long for years. As the proven source of pure 25-OH-D3 for diet fortification, High-D is the fastest and most efficient way to provide birds with essential vitamin D. One product, 25 plus years on the market, more than 100 research trials, and 3 billion birds fed per year. There's only one High-D. Learn more at dsm.com/HY-D.
Well, that's fantastic. Several things about your story that I really enjoy. And one of them is a student who had aspirations to go to vet school and did it. Because we have so many students that come in and they worry about that, but there are people who do it. Mm-hmm. And then just not necessarily ending up where you thought you would be. Because
I
I
had no
hear so
idea.
many students, they express worries and anxiety about that. Well, what if things don't go according to my plan right now? And I usually say, great, because that's the exciting part. If you knew exactly how your life was going to go, how boring would that be?
Right. And we actually, when I was at the university, we really didn't get our hands on the students until like their third year. And we had so many students that would say, gosh, we wish we would have known about poultry, before this point, in our career. And so we made a big push, and they're doing it now, that in the first year of vet school, the poultry professors get in front of them and they get to get exposed to the poultry industry early on, so it can help them make that decision.
Very good. Well, it's not exactly a tiny industry. There's some need there. So I think that's a great
Oh,
thing.
definitely,
Yeah.
especially in hatcheries. So I encourage students a lot, because some of the greats, like I mentioned, Donna Hill, Chris Williams, people like that, Cal Anthony, Dr. Kears, that generation, everybody's starting to retire or have retired years ago. And I'm not a spring chicken anymore. And we need poultry vets in the hatcheries because, it's so important. It's just so important for the whole industry.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, you bring up hatcheries, and let's explore that a little bit. I think especially with some conversation about chick quality,
Mhm.
and I would not suggest that everything about chick quality comes from the hatchery, but I think that's certainly a place we could start. So,
Mhm.
yeah, you can take this whatever direction you'd like, but let's talk about chick quality, and maybe let's start with just what does that mean? If we throw out the term chick quality, what do you see that as meaning?
Well, besides the obvious, that you don't have navel issues, you don't have dehydration, you have basically what most people would consider a good quality chick. We also need a chick that has a really good immune system behind him, that can handle what we're throwing at him. You think about it, we're giving vaccines at the hatchery. Can these birds handle those vaccines? Because let's face it, vaccines are a stressor. So there are things that we're going to be putting these chicks through that first 24 hours of life, basically, before they get to a farm. And we need to be sure that we have, just a good bones there, that they're able to handle what we're throwing at them. And once they get to the farm, that they're very active and get to the feed and water in a timely manner, and then therefore will be able to perform for us in the field.
Yeah, I'm sure transportation issues, depending on where you are in the country,
Mhm.
those get to be very challenging. And uh, yeah, I've spent about half my life in pretty hot places and about half in pretty cold places. And both have their own
Yeah, it kind of
challenges.
amazes me in both of those extremes, how people actually do as well as they do,
Yes.
in those
Yeah.
extremes, weather extremes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The humidity, a big part of that too, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, I'm in Mississippi, so I
Yeah.
know all about that.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Well, and you talk about the immune system, and it is so important. And I've always been a person that I like things I can see, and I can't really see how, how well the immune system is functioning, except when it's not.
Mhm.
So, yeah, what are some of the parameters that you would look at to consider whether or not the chick's going in with a healthy immune system?
Quite honestly, visibly, there's not
Hmm.
much you can look at to
Right.
tell you whether or not he's going to have a good immune system. That's why, I tell everybody you have to look at the big picture. You can't just look at a chick and say, "Oh, that's a good quality chick." What is the breeder vaccination program looking like? A lot of people kind of stress out, I guess you'd say, when they know they're going to get pullet chicks out there in the field. And like, oh, I got pullet chicks. Well, what I like to tell growers is, hey, that's not so bad. Think about it. We're vaccinating the hens, anywhere from 10 to 12 weeks and then 18 weeks, and then that's it. And so
Hmm.
you're getting chicks off of pullet flocks, say 27 to 31 weeks of age. They actually are closer to their vaccinations than any of the older flocks. So
Right.
they should have higher titers, more maternal antibodies passed on to them than the
Hmm.
older ones. So just a little tender loving care on the front end, because they can't
Yeah.
thermoregulate their body temperature as well. things like that, bump up the temperatures a little bit, walk those birds, maybe even more than you do older flocks, and just get them off to a good start, you're probably actually going to be ahead of everybody else as far as the immune system goes in these birds. So I try to encourage them that, it's not always bad if you get pullet chicks. Everybody kind of stresses out about that because they're coming out of a little bitty eggs. So it's going to be a little bitty chick.
Right.
But in reality, I have some farmers that do excellent with pullet chicks.
Oh, great. Yeah. There are always things that you can do if you think about it. You think about what is the big picture, what's the situation, and what are some of the strategies we can use.
Right. And talking about things you can see, I know a lot of people actually like to weigh chickens, weigh baby chicks at the hatchery to say whether or not it's a good quality chick. I personally don't lean on that very much because you have to be careful, because just because a chick weighs more than another chick does not mean it's a good quality chick.
Right.
Because you got to think about it. While that chick is in incubation and in the machines, the embryo, what it's going through, let's say it's too cold or it's too hot, whatever it is, he's just not happy. Right. So he is supposed to be utilizing that yolk to grow, to build up his heart, build up his kidneys, and just, all his tissues, and just be a really good quality chick. Well, if things aren't perfect for him, what he's going to do is he's going to shut down metabolism of that yolk, and he's just going to try to stay alive and try to hatch. Right. So these little fellas that actually do make it and hatch, guess what? They're going to hatch, but they're going to be smaller in size, but they're going to have a really large unabsorbed yolk. It's not infected or anything, but it's larger than it should be because he did not utilize it during incubation like he should have. So guess what happens when you weigh him? He actually weighs pretty good amount. So we think, okay, well, he's a good, healthy chick, where in reality, he's actually a poor quality chick because he did not utilize his yolk like he should have during incubation and grow. And so we have to be careful about how we actually visibly look at some of these chicks and say whether or not they are a good quality chick or not.
Right. What do you think as far as looking at mortality down the road, maybe a couple days down the road, a week down the road, and whether or not, how does that correlate with chick quality? I mean, I'm sure if chick quality is very poor, there would be a correlation.
Well, everybody loves to use that rule of thumb. If the chick dies before day three or less, it's the hatchery's fault. Or maybe we could track it back to breeders or something like that. But then after that, the hatchery's off the hook and anything else is in the field. That, like I said, is a rule of thumb. Sometimes that works out right and sometimes it doesn't. There is a lot. I always love to tell my hatchery managers, you have such an impact, not just on mortality, but on performance down the road. So, for example, if we overheat chicks in the hatchery, they will never compensate. That I can tell you, and there's been lots of research behind it, and I've seen it. If we overheat chicks in the hatchery, they will not perform in the field. We're all be scratching our heads thinking, why didn't they perform? Why don't we have the weight? Why don't we have the feed conversion? And it could be something as simple as we just overheated them in the hatchery. Because the guts are the first thing, the intestines are the first thing to get hit hard with overheating. Yeah. And so they, like I said, they never will compensate that back. They never will get that good performance if we overheated them early.
Right.
They do have a huge impact. And there's a lot of different things we can look at that I can track back to the hatchery. Like I said, it's not always the hatchery's fault. It may even go further back, like you even mentioned earlier, maybe even go further back than that to the breeders. But it's not just 3 days and then we're home free.
Right.
We could have an impact further down the road for sure.
Oh, sure. If a hatchery were to err slightly on one side or the other, would being just slightly cool be preferable to overheated?
I always say that I would prefer to be a little bit on the cooler side than the hot side. But you have to be really careful with that because, and I'm thinking of things past hatch. So once we've hatched, one of the most difficult things for hatchery managers to manage is chick comfort. And it's really sad. Sometimes I go in these hatcheries and they are doing an excellent job on incubation, but then we lose them on that chick floor or in transport or something like that. Because what happens, we're putting vaccine on them. So we're wetting the chicks. We do this with mass application spray vaccination. So they're getting wet. So they're going to be a little bit chilled from that, but they should dry down within 10 to 15 minutes and be fine. Mm-hmm. But if we have the environmental temperature in that room too cold, what could happen is they start to pile and they're trying to get warm. Chicks do that to get warm. They're going to huddle together and try to get warm. Well, in my mind, it's not really the cold ones that I'm so worried about. It's those little fellas that are in the middle of that pile. They only have a small area to pile into or to huddle up to try to get warm. And it's the little fellas in the middle of that pile that I'm really concerned about because they're actually getting overheated. And so it's very difficult to manage because you don't want fans blowing directly on these chicks. Like I said, they're wet from their vaccines. So we know that's going to chill them and, then they're going to tend to pile. But we definitely don't want to overheat chicks and have them panting on the floor because then that's going to lead to dehydration. Because a baby chick is going to cool himself by evaporative cooling. So what he's going to do is he's going to pant to try to cool himself down. And when he's doing that, he's losing moisture. So if we get everything perfect in incubation and then we get into that point and we have him panting and overheated, what's going to happen is he might not leave the hatchery full-blown dehydrated, but he's going to be a little mildly dehydrated. And he's not going to feel well. And if things aren't perfect in transport, if they're not perfect on that farm, if a grower's not walking those birds constantly, we're going to get into issues with dehydration out there in the field.
Yeah.
So it's catch-22. It's that cold, you get them too cold, but a lot of times getting them too cold actually leads to getting them too hot. So,
yes.
It's very difficult to manage.
Yeah. And probably I would guess some of that has to do with just, like you mentioned, keeping the ambient temperature, keeping the room temperature. And, if you're working in that room, it may feel a little warm.
Exactly.
But that's what the birds are going to need.
Keep in mind. We have people working in that room as well.
Yeah.
So we have to, manage that as well. They have to be comfortable. But a lot of times it just comes down to just the logistics of the placement of the pallets and things like that. In wintertime, do we have a pallet sitting right in front of one of the load dock doors? They are going to be colder there because we're going to have air seeping in through those doors and things like that. I encourage a lot of my hatcheries to get a thermal camera, walk around with your thermal camera, walk around with your thermometer, take rectal temperatures, vent temperatures, and just see what that chick comfort is looking like. Bird behavior is going to tell you a lot. If you walk by those pallets and you don't see chicks, that means they're all piled to one side. If they're really loud, they're usually very loud if they're hot and overheated. So use all your senses and use the tools you have, the thermal cameras, the rectal thermometers. Walk around and see when are they comfortable. Are they more comfortable when they have this fan on or when they're in this position? And I've actually gotten a lot of my hatcheries to actually mark out what I call parking lots. So it's a no-brainer. This is where we're going to put this pallet, and this is how we're going to move this fan to keep these chicks at their most comfortable. And it's very interesting to kind of watch, just going in there and just moving a few pallets around, just to see the chick comfort improve greatly working with them in that way.
Oh, yeah. Probably most of us have experienced, you go to a restaurant and they happen to put you right under, a fan or, the airflow. Exactly. And the next table over is perfectly comfortable. Same room. Seems the same. And
that's exactly what it is in these chicks. It's more of the airflow around them than, having something blowing straight on them or, a lot of times our chick rooms are small. So we have to do like a laminar flow where we actually push the pallets really close together, but kind of make a tunnel and have that fan go through there to try to pull that heat off of them. Where in hatcheries that are larger and we have more room, we can actually space those out and just have some ceiling fans and just have that airflow going, through the pallets and try to keep them as comfortable as possible.
There's just no substitute, I think. Just no substitute for observation. Just
there's not.
Making observations, watching, listening. Yeah.
Bird behavior
Makes a big difference.
is really very interesting. I almost did one of my masters on bird behavior. I sat there for hours watching video in chicken houses, and I'm kind of glad I didn't do that now. But bird behavior, not only in the hatchery, but just in the field as well. If you see chicks huddled together, they're cold. They are trying to get warm. And we do our best. We try to be mama hen. We have our brooders out there. We have the supplemental heat out there. But we are just not as good as mother hen. We never will be. No. And so we have to watch that bird behavior. And if they are huddled together, they're cold. Bump that temperature up a little bit higher. Like I was talking about earlier, the pullet chicks, they cannot thermoregulate their body temperature as well. So they need a little bit more, a couple of degrees higher brooding temperature than, say, prime age flock. And so it will amaze you if I can ever talk a grower into that, hey, let's just bump it up a couple of degrees. Then we'll go off and go look at the other houses and then come back, how spread out those birds are.
Oh, yeah.
And when they're spread out and they're kind of quiet and you just hear soft chirping and they're drinking and they're eating, they are comfortable. They will let you know if they're not comfortable. They really will.
Yeah.
Because if they're screaming, I was going to say, if they're screaming, it's just instinct. They're calling for mama. They're like, come help me. I'm not happy. So if you hear and they're screaming really loud, something's not right. So we just want them to, be as comfortable as possible during breeding.
Yeah. And I'm sure, human nature is such, we think very much in the here and now. So you think, well, it's a couple of degrees, but that's going to cost me a little bit. But in the long run,
the performance you're going to get out of those birds is going to be so much greater. Much greater.
Yep. One thing I've been thinking about as we've been chatting, and that's the degree to which I see more and more of my students, and these are undergrads, but they fall into that anthropomorphism. And it's so tempted to think that the animals need and want exactly what we need and want. And when we think about temperature, you see people do this with newborns. They dress their newborns when it's 70 degrees out the way that they are comfortable. And that baby's not comfortable in the same way. And the same thing for our animals. We have to really understand them and know what they need and understand that may be different than what we need.
And like you said, the behavior, they are going to let you know. Watch that bird behavior, and they will let you know. And this goes back to looking at that big picture as well. Do we have them out there on used up litter that's going to tend to hold a little bit more heat versus where they're on brand new litter? Maybe it was a little wet when we put it in there. So, you've got to look at that whole big picture to tell you, we have guidelines. We have temperature guidelines that every grower is given by their company, but those are guidelines. Watch that bird behavior, and it is going to tell you where you need to be. It may be below that guideline, or it may be above that guideline. So the bird behavior is huge.
Yeah, and that should be the beauty, the art, the fun of having animals, is that you begin to understand your situation and the places where you can make a difference. The guidelines are great because they're kind of our boundaries, or the guardrails. But really understanding, okay, I know in my situation I need to tweak this, and that's going to work really well.
I was actually having a conversation with a broiler manager this past week, and he's been around for a while. And he was telling me, he said, if I could just train my service techs to know that the best tool out there is a 5-gallon bucket. What he means by that is just turning that bucket upside down and just sitting in the chicken house and just watching the birds. And that behavior, they are going to let you know if they're happy or if they're not, and just give them what they need.
That's right. Do you foresee, I'm going to go just a bit of a tangent for a second. Do you foresee a lot of opportunities as we move forward with AI, not avian influenza, but artificial intelligence? Anymore, I have to be really specific about that.
Right.
But with artificial intelligence tools for monitoring, and especially some of the visual things that we might be able to do, monitoring behavior, or even the sounds, monitoring the sounds that the animals are making.
There is a lot of work going on with that right now. What I think would be some of the more exciting would be the sounds, like you're talking about. I know they're doing things in cattle where you're listening for the respiratory sounds and everything.
Right.
Why couldn't we do that in a chicken house? And maybe be ahead of a respiratory virus that's maybe going through the flock.
Right.
There is a lot of work out there right now. We've always had the environmental sensors. You've got the water usage, temperatures, humidity, ammonia levels, all those good things. They're getting a little bit more sophisticated now, more sensors out there in different areas of the house and everything. But doing that sort of thing with the respiratory sounds or just the behavioral sounds. Like I said, usually you can tell when a bird's not happy, he's going to be louder. That's very interesting. Now in the hatchery, it's really cool. I mean, they're doing all this heartbeat detection type stuff. Wow. So you're not wasting vaccine.
Right.
Because we're doing in vivo vaccination in a lot of cases. And so we don't want to waste vaccine and put it in an infertile egg, and things like that. So there's a lot going on with a heartbeat technology. There's gender ID now that is just amazing, the speed that this works at, and they can pretty accurately tell you whether it's going to be a male or female. And that helps you on your grow outs, because if you can place solid houses of all males or all females, you're going to manage it differently.
Sure.
Your males are going to tend to be, especially towards the end of that flock, your males are going to tend to be a little bit bigger than your females. So how do we manage that water? Are we going to get a little wetter because we're trying to manage down to the females and things like that? So it helps you actually manage the flocks better, being able to gender ID them at the hatchery, and all the AI and the technology behind that is really interesting.
Yeah. And with gender ID, especially in the layer industry,
right.
That's very, very, very important for table egg production.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Those poor guys. Just we don't need too many of you. Sorry, guys, but it's good to know that the earlier the better. Yeah,
that's right.
Absolutely. That's right. Absolutely. Well, this has been a great visit. Did want to ask if there's anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like to throw out there.
That's kind of a loaded question.
I know.
We could talk for hours on this chick quality and just different things. And I guess the biggest thing that I see, if I have to say there's a fault in the industry that affects chick quality, would be just communication.
Yep.
And what I mean by that is just communication between the departments. So many times I go into these integrator facilities, and everything is so siloed. The hatcheries doing their thing, the breeders are doing their thing, broilers are doing their thing. And to get that communication between the departments where we're working together to fix problems, solve problems. The companies that do that, the integrators that do that, to me, they are just so far ahead than the others, just having that communication between those departments. And I just like to encourage everybody to really work towards that, to have that better communication.
That's really good advice. I mean, that should be the strength of vertical integration, that you can step back and look at the big picture, and maybe a sacrifice or a cost here more than pays off over here. But I'm sure there's just so much pressure in every segment to maximize and, to be as efficient as possible. And
there is. And that's the issue a lot of times with our hatcheries and on the chick side of things is, we might not be selling these birds, till 35 or 63 days of age. It's so hard to measure that impact that we have early on that down the road. And so where you might want to implement change or do something different in a hatchery, it's hard to measure the impact that it had later. So that makes it more difficult, I think, to, be able to implement some of those changes.
Sure. I'm sure it can feel very risky when you don't know, and there's a lot at stake.
Don't know. So, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well, very interesting. This has been great discussion. And down the road, there could definitely be other things we could chat about, because it's such an important issue. And I don't know, the size of a chick. They're so small. So I think it's easy to overlook the importance of that stage, but it's so important. I mean, it's what's getting you off to your start. So very important time of life.
It sure is. It sure is. I enjoy working with them.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, we've been visiting with Dr. Sue Ann Hubbard, and we thank you so much for your time. And again, working as a poultry veterinarian consultant, you've got your consulting business, Professional Poultry. Anything you'd like to say about how people could get in touch with you?
Most everybody in the industry kind of knows me. Like I said, there are not very many of us vets that actually work in the hatchery. I actually am at an advantage where I don't just do hatchery work. With my history, having worked for the university, I was lucky to be able to work with all the companies here in the state of Mississippi, whether it was commercial layers or broilers, and get to see kind of how everybody did everything different. So I credit that to really helping me in my career. So I don't just limit myself to hatcheries, but I do direct consulting with some integrators, as well as I do have some contract with some allied industry people as well.
Great. Well, very good. Well, thanks again for your time. We sure appreciate it. And we thank everybody out there for listening. And until we get a chance to chat again, we'll sign off and say goodbye. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jason.